Well, hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Ricardo Cabrera, and we are here today with Natalia Infante. And Natalia is an expert on research marketing, and she's going to talk about today about how to grow your business by connecting with the Hispanic customers. So with that, let me see if I can do one quick change here with our setup. There we go. And so welcome everybody. Thank you everybody for attending and and being here with us today. And I want to thank our sponsors and the people that help us promote this webinars, SUMA, KGNU, Alpine Bank, and all the cultural brokers that are here listening to us. You know who you are. My name is Ricardo, as I said earlier, and we are going to have Natalia introduce herself right now and tell us a little bit about herself. Natalia, tell us a little bit about where you come from, your experience, so we learn a little bit about you.
Sure. Thank you, Ricardo. Hello. Thank you to all of you guys out there joining us today. Welcome to How to Grow Your Business by Connecting with the Hispanic Consumers. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Natalia Infante Caylor, like Ricardo mentioned. I'm the owner of Infante Consulting and Research in Fort Collins. I would like to also thank the Latino Chamber of Commerce of Boulder County for inviting me to participate today to present. So let me just share a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Paraguay in South America, so that's just south of Brazil and north of Argentina. I moved to the US about 30 years ago, knowing very little English. And then eventually I went to school. I started learning English, got a GED, went to school, and eventually got a PhD from Colorado State University in 2018. After 20 some years after getting my GED. Before opening my business, I taught at several universities, research in Spanish and also English. I worked as a marketing director for a financial service organization. I'm a Latina business owner. I conduct my market research, as Ricardo mentioned, and I also do focus groups. I design strategic plans to determine the feasibility of the product or service and present solutions to businesses and organizations based on that research and interview with current customers or potential customers. So that's in a nutshell what I am. Thank you, Ricardo.
That's quite a bit. I am so happy that you are here with us today.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Yes, absolutely. So as we go along, guys, there is a chat. There's a question and answer box down here. Please make sure you ask your questions there. Ask them early and ask them often. We are going to go through the presentation and we're going to be answering questions at the end. So, write them down so you don't forget them. And we'll have a list. We'll have them here for you, and then we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. Yeah, okay, so with that, if you are ready, Natalia, why don't we get started and, take it away.
Thank you, Ricardo. Yes, and as Ricardo mentioned, also, if you have a question about a specific slide, if you can write it down, and then at the end, I can probably go back and revisit that if you would like me to. Okay, so as I said, the name of the presentation is How to Grow Your Business by Connecting with the Hispanic Consumers, and this is what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about Hispanics versus Latinos. I'm sure some of you guys probably heard the word Hispanics and then also Latinos, and I'm not sure, probably you're not sure when to use which one. So we're going to talk about the differences. I'm going to cover some data about Hispanics in the US, then Colorado, and then more specifically Boulder County, because that's where the Latino Chamber is. So we're going to start with an overview of the US, then Colorado, and then more specifically Boulder later. What else? We're going to talk about who are Hispanics as consumers, talking about the cultural side of it, the buying power of Latinos or Hispanics in the US and also in Colorado, Hispanics and financial services. I wish I had time to talk about more other services, but for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to talk about Hispanics and financial services, Hispanics and healthcare, And I'm going to share some facts about marketing when doing translations from English to Spanish and related to marketing. Okay, so who are Hispanics? So Hispanic is a word that started in the 1976 by the US Congress. They passed the only law in this country's history that mandated the collection of certain information and analysis of data. There we go. So basically, it's someone from a Spanish-speaking country of birth or someone that has ancestors from the Spanish-speaking country. So that could be someone with a Spanish-speaking background or trace their origin or descent from a Spanish-speaking country, including Spain, but not including Portugal or not including Brazil, because Brazil speaks, in Brazil they speak Portuguese. So these standards, the Hispanic word is mainly used in schools, public health facilities, and other government entities to keep track of the services they are providing to the Hispanic population, or how many Hispanics they serve each year. So the word Latino, on the other hand, refers to people that are coming from Latin American countries that live in the US. So Brazilians, they might be considered Latinos, but they don't always speak Spanish. So you might hear Latinos that we refer to Latinos as people coming from a Spanish-speaking country, or also people coming from Brazil. So for the purpose of this presentation, you might hear me say Latinos and Hispanic using one of the two words. So just so that you know. Okay, I mentioned that before. And now we're going to look at what is the expected US population, the growth over the next few years. And for this, I'm talking about the US Hispanic population, of course. So by 2025, it is expected that the Hispanic population will grow to 20%. So right now, I believe we are, I'm going to look at the number shortly, but 2025 is going to be about 20% growth. And by 2030, is expected to grow 21%. The next slide, we're going to look into why learn about Hispanic consumers. The buying power of Hispanic in this country is, like we show here, is by the billions with a B. So starting from the top, the yellow, you can see that Mexico, or people coming from Mexico, their buying power is about $881 billion. That might be a little bit higher, actually. For Puerto Ricans, their buying power is $158 billion. And for people coming from Central America to the US, is about $137, if not $37 billion, I'm sorry, if not more. And people coming from South America, their buying power is $135 billion for the US in general. Now we're going to talk about, so that was the US, now we're going to talk about Latinos in Colorado. So this is going to be looking at some data from 2019, then 2020, then what is expected 5 years from now, and what is expected 30 years from now. So the purchasing power for Latinos in Colorado in 2019 was more than $12.3 billion. And as far as the economy, by the year 2020, which is where we are now, it is expected that Latinos will represent 12.7% of the total GDP of the country. As far as workforce for Colorado, we can see that over the next 5 years, according to some research, that Latinos will account for about 50% of the Colorado workforce. As far as population, about 40% of Colorado's population by the year 2050 will be Latinos. As far as age, the median age for Latinos in Colorado is 27 years old, compared to 42 years old of non-Hispanic whites. So 1 of every 4 Coloradoans will be a Latino or will be Latino by the end of this decade. That's what the research is showing. And this research was conducted by the Latino Leadership Institute, as you can see there at the bottom of the page. As far as language, about 80% of Latinos in Colorado are native born. They were born here in Colorado, and they believe that speaking Spanish at home is still very important to them. There we go. Okay, so now we're going to learn a little bit more about the culture. So Hispanics in general, also I want to mention also that what I'm going to share here does not, probably won't apply every single word or every single description to Hispanics that you might know or you might work with, but some of the qualities might apply to people that you work with or that you know. So Hispanics tend to be more conservative in values and customs, so family traditions and things like that. They tend to adapt to things quickly, and they do adapt to things over time. They tend to be loyal. That was one thing that I found across the board, is that Latinos tend to be very loyal. And also when they like a product or a service, they will stick with it till the end, pretty much. Again, loyalty is very important. They tend to be family oriented. That is very, very important in the Latino culture. As far as kids, we believe that our kids are an extension of ourselves. So the kids, according to the Latino tradition or culture, means that once they turn 18, they just don't leave the nest unless they have to go somewhere, like go to study, find work or something, but most likely they live at home with their parents until they get married. So they don't just become an adult and leave the nest and become independent. And that also applies usually to Latino families that are coming to the US, not necessarily Latinos that were born in the US. So that will be the first generation. Like I mentioned, they tend to be more conservative when it comes to social issues and family values. So next we're going to talk about acculturation. So acculturation mainly is the adaptation to a new culture. So how are we, when we move to the US, we are adapting to the host culture, which in this case will be the US culture. So if you look at the left side of the screen, you can see the first square says non-cultured. So that is typically people that come to the US and are in that period between year 1 and year 10. The middle one is the biculture. Usually happens between year 10 and year 20 of living in the US. And the last one on the right side of the screen, you will see 20 plus years. So most of the time, the acculturation process is determined by the amount of years that we live in the US. Not always, but usually that helps with that. So for the non-culture, usually means that I just moved to the US. I'm in the period of 1 to 10 years. I am probably listening to a lot of songs in Spanish, the radio in Spanish, watching TV in Spanish. My social circle is probably Spanish-speaking people or things like that. So I rely heavily on the Spanish language and the culture. When we move to the middle one, the bicultural, the 10 to 20 years, that's when we start adapting and using kind of half and half. So I can watch TV in English and I can watch TV in Spanish if I want to. I can listen to songs in English or in Spanish. So we start using both languages probably at the same time. And also the last one, the acculture one, the third section, 20 plus years, that's usually when I feel very confident or comfortable engaging with the English-speaking population. So this is not set on stone, like I mentioned, is sometimes it depends on many things. So for example, if I start working, then I have more, I work with other people that speak English or something like that, then I tend to adapt to the culture faster. Or if my kids start going to school, then I have more contact with people that speak English or with the American culture. So that helps with the acculturation process also. And also, like I mentioned, the influence of media, TV, watching TV in English or Spanish and vice versa. Okay, so next we're gonna talk about statistics about English versus Spanish in the US. According to this study that I read, it says that 70% of Hispanics living in the US speak English, which is, I think, very significant. 61% of Hispanics living in the US speak Spanish at home. Remember I mentioned at the very beginning that even though some people were born in the US or in Colorado, they still think that speaking Spanish at home is very important. So this is one of the cases. Next, I want to share with you this law of the Hispanic Universe. If you haven't read this book, The Whole Enchilada, I strongly suggest you do it. It's in English, it's really good. And it's written by Juan Fauda, as you can see here. So in his book, he mentioned several laws of the Hispanic universe. That's how he calls it. And I'm just sharing here a few of them that resonated with me. I thought were very interesting. So here they are. The first one says, culture is more than a language. Talk to us in our culture and the language thing will come. So it's true, culture is more than a language. Assume we are going to be emotional and dramatic. It makes things like relationships easier and bring flavor to life. I think it's very true. I think as Hispanic or Latinos, we tend to be very emotional and dramatic, but in a really good way, not in a negative way. So I like that Hispanic law that he mentioned there. The next one says, when you are at a Hispanic friend's house and their mom offers you food, do not refuse a plate. Some of you probably had that experience before, and we can talk more about that at the end, but I think that's very important. Just thinking of my mom when I used to have friends at home and they will come and probably didn't want to eat anything, but my mom will be like, hey, eat this, eat this, eat this. And of course they will have to eat it because it's kind of not polite to say no, no thank you when it comes to food. The next one, it says, we are dramatic, loud, and exaggerated. It is part of what brings flavor to our culture, and we love it. So if you can see, the theme here is all about culture and flavor and being dramatic. And again, dramatic in a very good way, not in a negative way. And the last one, according to him, which I believe, I strongly believe is true, family is always first. So for the Latino family, family is always first. And you'll see that as a theme throughout the presentation also. So now I'm going to talk about Hispanic and services. Remember at the beginning I said I was going to talk about Hispanics and financial services and also Hispanics and healthcare. So here it is. So Hispanics and banking. Remember that Hispanics usually come from countries where there's a lot of economic instability. Also, there we go. They come from places where the interest rates are really high. The valuation of their country's currency is very common. This is also usually common. We tend to have banks that close overnight with all of the customers' money. So let's say I worked so hard for my money, I deposit that money in the bank, and then the bank decides to close tomorrow, and there goes my money, all the money that I worked so hard for. So usually that's why you might see some Latinos or Hispanics coming to the US. They usually carry cash because it's the trust issue of, I don't know if this bank is going to close tomorrow and take all my money. Credit cards. So one of the things that I would like to say also is that if you're a financial institution, I think that Hispanics or Latinos, they need to know that they can trust you and they can trust your organization, and you're going to be there for the long run, of course. So when it comes to credit cards, in the US, according to what I read, in the US, having access to credit card is more, it seemed like something as a social mobility factor indication, when in Latin American countries, having access to credit cards is like a last resource. It's like, I will only use credit cards if I really need to, if I can't make it on my own. When it comes to retirement planning and life insurance, beliefs tend to be that I don't need life insurance. I don't need to plan for this because my kids are going to take care of me and my husband when I'm old, or my extended family members are going to take care of me. So also, Very important, most Hispanic families plan to support their parents financially, especially if you are the oldest one in the family. The other thing is that most Hispanics tend to keep track of their expenses every month and stick to a budget. Again, these are Hispanics that are coming to the US, not Hispanics that were born in the US. So that might be a little bit different. Next, I'm going to talk about Hispanics and healthcare. Preventive care is not very common in Latin American countries. Self-diagnosis. They are more likely to self-diagnose or call mom or grandma and say, these are the symptoms I have. What do I have? And grandma will be, okay, mijita, make sure you take this and you drink this and you do this. So why go to the doctor? I'm not saying don't go to the doctor, but that's a big leap sometimes. Medicine without prescription. Reason for self-diagnosis is easier to buy most of the medicine that they need without a prescription in Latin American countries. Prescription and selling medications, most pharmacists, they can prescribe and sell medications right away. Instead of going to the doctor, getting a prescription, then going to the pharmacy, you can get everything at the same pharmacy. Okay, so people usually don't go to the doctor until it's something chronic, because remember, it's like, oh, I know what I have, or talk to mom, talk to grandma, and then if even I go to the pharmacy and they can help me, then maybe I'll go to the doctor. Okay, the next page. I found very interesting information about healthcare, so I have 2 pages actually, 2 slides. Healing practices. So they believe, the majority of them believe that using healing practices or relying on healing practices such as herbs and prayers, especially in rural areas, is very important. Proximity to Mexico, especially for people coming from Mexico to the US, they might just wait until it's time to go to Mexico, let's say at the end of the year for Christmas, and then say, okay, I'll just go to the doctor when I go to Mexico. It's probably cheaper, and they also speak the language. So that could be one of the reasons why they wait till they go back to Mexico or they go and visit family members. One thing that I found that I thought very interesting, is Hispanic have the longest life expectancy in the US. I thought that was fascinating. Definition of healthy. So for the US general population, meaning non-Hispanic population, if someone asks us, okay, what is healthy to you, given the options that we have, we probably will say something like something that is low fat, low sugar, doesn't have a lot of salt. And I might say, okay, given the options that I have here, I might say, okay, a piece of frozen chicken is healthy, and probably frozen veggies. If I don't have access to something like fresh vegetables from the garden, I can say, okay, this is still healthy. For an immigrant coming from a Latin American country, if they look at the same thing, they might say, no, this is not healthy because it's frozen. So given the choices, or if they have other choices to select from, they might say, healthy to me is a fresh grilled chicken, for example, that was not frozen before, or fresh vegetable from a garden instead of something frozen. So it's just that slightly different perception of what could be healthy to one group versus the other one. And also believing that if it's something fresh, probably it has no preservatives or it has very little. So I thought that was very interesting too. Talked about that. Okay, Hispanics and sports. A lot of you might know this already, but the number 1 sports for Hispanics is football, which is, in Spanish is football, but it's actually soccer. And Hispanics are just crazy about soccer, and I agree 100% with that. The second most popular sports for Latinos or Hispanics is baseball in some countries. So for example, if you look at the entire Latin American countries, the map, you will see, or you can read probably that it's starting up from Venezuela all the way north. So Venezuela and Central America, baseball is very popular. So probably Venezuela and then other countries below Venezuela geographically, baseball might not be as popular. But football, soccer is always across the board, is the most popular one. So what are Hispanics most proud of? Music, salsa, merengue, bachata, norteña, and there are a lot of other types of music. I didn't write all of them here. Food, carne asada, arroz con pollo, arepas, empanadas. So actually here on the picture, you can see empanadas. That's a picture from my house, actually. Our values, our family, like I mentioned before, family is always the number one, top of the line on our list. Hispanic identity, like I mentioned, music, food, culture, that's our identity. Respect to the elderly is also very important. Education as being well-mannered. So I have someone asking me, so how come when sometimes when I invite Latino coworkers to an event or something, they say, oh yeah, I'll go, but they don't come. Sometimes, not always. And that usually is because they are being polite. They don't want to say, no, I can't go, I'm sorry. It's like, yes, I'll go. And they might not be able to come, but usually they want to be polite, and they are polite, so they will say, yes, thank you, I'll go. Again, might not apply to everybody, but that's overall. Okay, next we're going to talk about individualism versus collectivism. So if you look on the left side of the screen versus the right side, you'll see individualism is very common in the US. Collectivism is very common in Latin American countries. Again, these two groups might apply to a lot of other countries outside of the US and Latin American countries. But for the purpose of the presentation today, I'm going to go specifically the US and Latin America. So we're going to start at the top and go clockwise. So if we look on the left side of the screen, the orange box where it says focus on individual, that's the US culture. Usually we tend to focus on our well-being, I will say. And then for a Latin American family, if you look on the right side, also the orange, you will see that we tend to focus more on our family and our extended family. So their well-being also. My cousin, my aunt, my grandma, my grandpa, brothers and sisters. And then if we go to the blue on the left side, you'll see employment mobility. That's usually typical in the US culture. And then if you go to the right side, also the blue, you'll see employment commitments. So Latinos or Hispanics usually tend to stay at a job for a longer time, usually. Then if we go to the green on the left side under individualism, you can see individual achievement versus pleasure from group achievement, like you can see in the Latin American sector. So I guess that's, I don't need to say much about that, but there you can see it. On the left side, the gray box, private work. In the US, we tend to keep family and work separately. We don't mix them. For Latin American families, we tend to mix them. So for example, if I am at work and it's my daughter's baptism, I will probably invite my coworkers. Or if it's my daughter's quinceañera, I will invite my coworkers. So we tend to mix the personal and work relationships also. Also, yeah, birthday, baptism, weddings. If we go to the yellow one on the left side, you can see oneself and immediate family. And then on the right side, focus more on the group. So again, as a Latino, we tend to make sure that everybody in our family is doing well so that we can do well too. So we can move forward together. Okay, Spanglish. What if you don't speak Spanish and you want to reach out to the Latino population? One thing is let the product attract the consumer. That's very important. Remember, Spanish is more than just language. It's about the culture also. Translate and adapt the material to fit the population and market. Make sure there's no direct translation from English to Spanish. And I'm going to mention more about that too shortly. Okay. Spanglish, like I mentioned before, is the mix of English and Spanish in the same sentence sometimes. Translation is more than a language, it's about culture. Okay, so what to keep in mind if you are translating, let's say, your marketing materials. Printing space. Spanish language tends to be 20 to 30% longer. So it takes up more room to print marketing material in English versus Spanish. It takes more space. Example, if I want to say in English, I start work tomorrow morning. In Spanish, it will be, yo empiezo a trabajar mañana de mañana. So even though I can get rid of the YO that is in parentheses there in Spanish, it will still be a longer sentence saying the same thing. So it takes more room, more space. Direct translation versus localization, meaning we can't just translate something word per word from English to Spanish. We have to make sure we know who the audience is. Are they mainly from Mexico? Are they mainly from Central America? Are they mainly from South America? If not, if we don't know, then we can use the standard Spanish, but something that will make sense to the population that will be reading that. Using culture also, keeping in mind that. Words that exist in English that don't necessarily exist in Spanish, or vice versa. So for example, toes, dedos. So dedos, like you see there, the second word, dedos could be from like toes or dedos, fingers. So we have to be more specific if we say dedos or dedos from, you know, toes. So just a slight example there, a small example. So this will be an example of a translation that was very interesting. So this was, I believe it was for Mexico. So as you can see at the top there, it says exit only in English. And then below that says éxito aquí. The first word in English and the first word in Spanish, they look very similar, but they are not the same thing. So the meaning when translated was different. So this is how what actually says. So instead of saying exit here, when translated, it says success here. So that was interesting. This one, it says construction site. So the way they translate it is not really, really bad. It didn't change the meaning so much like the Starbucks one did, but grammatically, the way it's written is not correct. So that was also very interesting that I saw there. Okay, so this is a tag from a clothes, and as you can see there on the left side, the English one and then the Spanish one below. So the Spanish one, I'm going to show you next to it the translated version of it, word per word, not taking into consideration the culture. So word per word, I'm going to translate the Spanish into the English. So this is what actually it says. The hand you wash, no bleach, no fall down, iron, good looking. So when you compare this English to the English that actually shows on the tag, it's very different. And then if you look at the tag, the Spanish word, I circled there the word chulo. So chulo is actually a Mexican slang that means good looking, hot, cute, handsome. So basically translated, this is saying that the iron is good looking, handsome. So I thought that was just funny. Okay, the next one. Chevy Nova, some people will say that this is a legend that never happened. I don't know, I was not around when this happened. But anyway, you probably heard about this. So Chevy Nova was the model. So Nova, the way it sounds in Spanish means doesn't go, doesn't move. So this was scheduled to sell in Spanish-speaking countries, I believe also in Venezuela in 1970s, yes. So it wasn't selling, it wasn't very popular, that's what some people say. So actually it means does not move, does not go. So that might be the reason why it was not selling. Marketing solutions, always, if possible, work with a professional translator. Also, not because we have someone in our office or work that speaks Spanish, that means that that person can actually translate something, especially marketing material, very important, into Spanish. It's very important to take into consideration the culture, who the audience is. Website and social engagement, we can probably have a small page that has some bilingual words or something in Spanish in case I am not very comfortable reading in English, but I want to check what's on your website, I can go and say, oh, Espanol or Spanish, and I can read something about your product or service there in Spanish just to give me an idea. Have a strategy and an approach when you are working with Hispanic consumers or clients. Okay, what about technology? So for technology, Facebook still is the #1 option and is fairly inexpensive. And Hispanics tend to use or be connected a lot of times to Facebook. Also your website if it has something in Spanish, and also WhatsApp. Even though it's not necessarily social media, but WhatsApp is a very common way of communicating among Hispanics, especially because you can do it anywhere in the world. Start small and give it some time to develop. Just don't give up if you try it once or twice. It might take some time. Okay, I mentioned that already. So other marketing suggestions. Understand the culture first. I mentioned that several times. It's very important. So don't worry too much if you don't speak the language, if you don't understand the language. Understanding the culture, I think, is the very first step. Emphasize Hispanic culture over an all Spanish language ad. There we go. Okay, not all Hispanics might want ads completely in Spanish. Remember, for Colorado, a lot of people, even though they were born here in Colorado and they speak English, they still prefer Spanish to talk at home. Consider adding just some words in Spanish or mixing it with English if you're doing marketing. One important thing is when you're advertising, if you're selecting a picture of a group of people or individual, if possible, remember to add a family, because Latinos tend to be family oriented and they come from the collectivism group, not the individualistic group. So that might help. Advantages and meaning of basic Spanish word. So usually if you have something in Spanish, or if you say something in Spanish, it might mean something that I value you, I value your culture, and I would like to make you feel welcome to my store or my organization. So here are just some examples of basic words that you can write it, you can try saying it, just to make the other person feel welcome into your place. Key takeaways, I will say, understand the culture first and know why they purchase your product or service. And remember, once they purchase your product or service, they tend to become loyal to your product or service. So that's really good. Relationships are very important for Latinos. We come from a collectivism culture. Again, group family is all about family. We tend to have more conservative values when it comes to social issues and family traditions. What else? Hispanics tend to be warm people. We like hugs, even though with COVID, it might be really, really hard. Family values are important, so taking care of parents is very important, financially or physically, it's very important. And we love bright colors. I mean, flowers, dance, accessories, that's what you will usually see it also. Even at the restaurants, you might see very bright colors, and that's really nice. And that's it for me. Here's my contact information. If you would like to connect with me on LinkedIn, send me emails, chat. Here's my email and my website name. Thank you so much. Okay, Ricardo.
Very nice, Natalia. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Very informative. Very well-rounded, and thank you for that. So
yeah,
we have some questions for you. Great. And I hope you're comfortable, because some of them are pretty good questions. Yeah. Okay. So grab your popcorn there, and I'm going to ask you the questions. I kind of divided the questions we have so far by topic, so okay, we're not jumping around too much. Let's start with the language questions. Spanish from different countries. Is it different? Are they different styles of Spanish from different countries? Usually it is. So I'm from Paraguay, and I don't use the tú. I use the usted, which is formal. If it's someone older than me, I will, out of respect, I will say usted. If you are, for those of you guys that are familiar with Spanish. But other than that, I use the Castilian Spanish.
and it's the voz. So the conjugation of the verbs are slightly different, but not a lot. And then people, and I think in Nicaragua, they also use the voz, but other countries, they might use the tu. So with that, it is different, slightly different. But also using certain words, I might call an object a different name than what you might call an object, the same object. For example, strawberry. For me, and I have a friend from Argentina, strawberry for us is called frutilla. But I heard from other people, for other people, frutilla means a blending of fruits, not a strawberry. So it's just a different meaning sometimes, but not a lot, I will say. But we can adapt to that. Sorry.
Okay, so not only accents, but words and sentences, and sometimes the way you communicate something is different. So like U.S. from the English from the U.S. versus English from England, or English from India, even they're all English, but they're very separate, and some words don't even cross or mean the same.
Exactly.
And that applies to Spanish as well.
Exactly. Yes.
Excellent. So I know from experience that interpreters have to be very careful with that, because if you're interpreting from somebody that's from the northern part of Mexico versus the southern part of Mexico or Guatemala, the words mean different things, and they have different meanings. So it's important to know that when you're marketing as well. I mean, there is such a thing as an international Spanish that is polite and generic enough that it fits to all the languages across the Latin America and Hispanic community.
Exactly. That's why it's very important sometimes to know the audience. Okay, who's my market? Is it mainly Mexican? Then for example, for the word beans, in Mexico, they call it frijoles. In Paraguay, they call it porotos. So if I know I have to translate or adapt a marketing material for mostly the population will be from Mexico, I know I will not use the word porotos, I'll use frijoles, most likely.
Excellent. Okay, a second language question, and this is a tough one. They're asking if the Spanish language is an abstract language or a specific language. Do you have the answer to that?
Well, what do you mean by abstract?
I think what they mean is the way that you communicate a phrase. So you said, for example, Spanish takes 25% more to get something across than English. And for example, Japanese is much more abstract. It takes even less words to say something.
Okay.
Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I think with the Spanish, we tend to use more descriptive words to describe something. Remember, we are emotional and dramatic, but that doesn't mean that we're going to use more words, but we tend to use more description. We also, like in English, we have the apostrophe to say Maria's house, right? In Spanish, we don't have the apostrophe S after a word to make it only to compress the sentence. We have to say the house of Maria. So of course we add of there, like a preposition and everything. And in English, sometimes we don't have to use that. We use the apostrophe, and that makes the sentences a lot shorter. So that's why also Spanish tend to take more space when you're writing it or you're saying it actually.
Excellent. So I have an example for you about that as well. An abstract versus a specific language.
Okay.
When somebody asks a Spanish-speaking person, where is the salt in the kitchen, right? The answer is going to be above the stove, to the right cabinet, on the third shelf, 4 rows back, 2 to the left, next to the pepper, there's the salt, right? That's specific.
I love it.
If you go to Japan and you ask in their language where the salt is, they'll tell you it's in the kitchen. And it creates conflicts when you are trying to market or you're trying to explain something. And this translates to speaking and writing. If you're a customer service person on the phone, or if you are a salesman, or maybe having a sales meeting where you want to gain a customer, you know, and you're Hispanic working with the Anglo, or an Anglo working with a Hispanic individual.
It's very interesting that you mentioned that. And it's very true also, now that you mentioned the business side. Usually, if you're working with Latin American, let's say, partners or customers or something, it's very common that when you call their home or their cell phone, you'll say, for example, oh, hi, Ricardo, how are you? How's your family? How's your daughter? How's your wife? How's your grandma? I mean, you talk about the family first. Usually you ask about the family, then you go to business, you know, oh, okay, this is the reason why I was calling you. And not like, hi, Ricardo, when is the next meeting type of thing. So we tend to, you know, add more, like get to know more about the family also, which is common.
Absolutely. And that's one of the questions we have, which I put under the culture section, but I'll ask it now just because we're talking about it. So
Sure.
Two things. In business, it's common. The cell phone thing is definitely a dichotomy in the US versus in Mexico. If you're in Mexico having a meeting or in Latin America and the cell phone rings, the person will stop the meeting to answer the phone and take the time to have a conversation, which drives me crazy.
Oh, yeah, me too.
In the United States, that's very rude. And what you do is that you shut your phone off or don't answer it during the meeting because you're taking the time away from the person in front of you. And that's something that we need to be aware of if we're working in this cross-cultural effect, because it might not be rude for the other person. It may feel rude to you when it's not, in fact, rude.
Exactly. And then showing up late.
Yes, right.
Very common.
Right. And, you know, in Mexico, that's where I'm from. And my experience is that sometimes it's out of your control. And sometimes it's a cultural thing where if they say the party starts at 5, you leave your home at 5:10 because you don't want to be the first one.
That's true.
But it's also common that the traffic is unpredictable and it can take you sometimes an hour to get somewhere that usually would take you 15 minutes. And people accommodate that and becomes part of the culture.
Very true. And also a lot of people rely on public transportation, which is not like here where we know at 5:15 I can take the bus on the corner and I know I will get, I don't know, to work at 5:35 approximately. But in many countries, we don't have that specific schedule. So
right.
It affects.
Second culture question. We're not done. I have one more language question, but since we're in the culture topic,
Sure.
The timing of a meeting, you mentioned it. It's different in Latin America than it is in the United States. It often happens with families that go talk to a principal, for example, a Spanish, Mexican or Spanish culture person, and they show up with the principal, and the first thing they do is socialize. And fraternize. So they talk about the friends, about how are you, you know, what's your name? Tell me about your wife. And then the principal's sitting there going like that, you know, he's like, okay, you know, looking at the clock and saying, okay, your time's up. Thank you for coming. And they didn't get to the topic in hand.
Exactly.
But that is common in Latin America. In the US, your time is counted, and it's important because you go home and you're done with work. In Latin America, you go home and you can work all day because it's much more social.
Exactly. So here you go to a parent-teacher conference and you know you have 10, 12, 15 minutes only, and then it's someone else's turn. But it's like, oh, I am just talking about, hey, how's your family? And like you mentioned, so yes, go home and we haven't talked about my kid.
Yeah, so the sensitivity there again works both ways. You have to know that if you go visit somebody during work hours in the US, you have your half an hour and you better get to the point as soon as you get there because you're going to run out of time. Yes. On the other hand, if you are on the principal side of the desk, there are strategies where you can hurry the meeting up knowing that they might not be aware that you only have a half an hour to have this meeting.
Exactly.
And that is the culture, a certain cultural awareness that works well to have on both sides of the table.
Absolutely. And then now that you mentioned something like that, also working on the business side of it, it's very common that in Latin America, I will probably, if I just met you, I will not say Ricardo. I will not call you Ricardo. I will say Señor Ricardo or Mr. Ricardo. So it's very common that we use the Mr., Mrs., Miss when referring to someone that we haven't, that is not, for example, a friend or a family member. It's always polite.
Yeah, it's absolutely the politeness factor and the hierarchical factor, because a boss's boss or your boss, you definitely treat differently than you do your equal boss or your employee. And that is very common in Hispanic cultures because it's very hierarchical, and not in the US. It's much more flat. I could go joke around and say things to my boss or my boss's boss that you would definitely not do in other countries.
Yes.
Yes.
And then one more thing also, if let's say you are an engineer or an architect, and I know that, I will call you architect Ricardo, or architect by your last name, or engineer so-and-so. So we call by the professional title and then the name also,
Right.
not just the first name. Yeah.
Right. And in my personal experiences, my beard is turning a little more white. They tend to treat me way different now when I go into the stores in Mexico. And they call me Don, which is, the old word. Yeah, the old man is here.
Grandpa.
Let's go help him.
Yeah, well, we call grandpa age usually. Yes, very interesting.
Oh, yes. Okay, so let me ask you the last language question. So the last language question, and then we have another question that just came in that kind of relates. It's the translation and interpretation. So you gave us several examples of classic errors and mistakes, and I see them all the time. Mm-hmm. There are people. I mean, the question is just because you speak Spanish doesn't mean that you are able or proficient to translate or interpret. It's a profession. Interpretation and translation is a profession that takes time and practice, education, and a lot of sensitivity. So the other question we have here now, it says, in a marketing campaign, is it okay to use the word like troca, marqueta, traila, when you are targeting a specific market that uses these words commonly? Those are three different words for the same thing.
I personally, I will not use it. Troca is a lot of people from Mexico, and I believe it's only people in the northern part of Mexico use that a lot. But we can use a more standard word that, because we don't have a lot of people just from Mexico, for example, living in Colorado. We also have people from Central America and South America. So if I'm from South America and I see the word troca, I was like, what in the world is that? I don't, but I need a truck, but I don't understand what they have. So I will probably use the most standard word.
A generic word, yes. Yeah, and that's always recommended when you don't know who's in front of you or who your audience is.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there are a lot of examples like that. So let's move on to a culture question. So Hispanics, you mentioned they are conservative in the way they do and act. They're polite, they're family oriented, and their kids are number one, right? We do everything for our kids. Yes. It happens in the U.S. as well. So how can marketing companies take advantage of this?
I mean, take advantage in a good way?
Yes, yes, of course. In marketing, how do you want to market to gain an audience rather than scare an audience?
I will say, based on what I've seen, is family. So if you have the ability to post pictures of your product, probably post pictures of families using your products or service instead of just an individual person. And probably also include grandma and grandpa into the picture, not just my kids, but also my mom and my dad, because remember, it's the extended family that is important, not just the kids, but we tend to take care of our parents also when they are older. Or they can move in our house, to our house, so we're taking care of them also there. So I will include family, extended family.
Okay, you did mention that the median age for Coloradoans was 27. So it's prime time to market to families and young kids.
Right.
Yes, excellent. Okay,
and Hispanics, sorry, Ricardo, one more thing. Hispanics tend to have larger families. I don't think I mentioned that.
Yes. And times are changing as well, but I can tell you my mom had 11 brothers and sisters.
Yeah, my mom was like 7 or 9, something like that.
Yeah, yikes. Can you imagine that, having 9 kids nowadays? Wow.
No, I love my kids, but that's too much.
Yeah, I have one and she's my favorite.
She's lucky, right? The only one.
Yeah, she's so lucky. Okay, so question. What is the difference between a Latino, a Latina, and a Latinx?
That's a great question. So Latino and Latina, they basically are the same thing. So Ricardo is Latino with an O at the end. So that means it's a male. I am Latina, female. So is Latin the same word? At the end, you will use A, the letter A, to refer to me. So I'm Latina because I'm a female. Ricardo will be Latino with an O at the end because he's a male. Latinx will be not using a specific gender. So no male, no female is a gender neutral word, Latinx. So you will see Latin with the X at the end, or you will also see Latin with the at sign of it, like an email, the at. I've seen that too. So it's basically gender neutral.
Okay, excellent.
Do you have anything to add to that, Ricardo?
Well, yes, you know, I thought the Latinx was not only gender, but you know, color and what's the other word? You know, so
country.
Country. So you have different countries, you have different colors, you have different genders and sexual orientations, and they're all, it's an all-inclusive word for all the colors and flavors of Latinos and Hispanics that are out there.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, because there's a lot of us, and they all relate, and they all might have a certain specification, but with the Latinx, it's just a one general, all-inclusive word that includes.
True. And if I can add one thing to that, also, the word Latinx is more commonly used among younger population. So I probably will not use the word Latinx with my mom, who's 75, or anyone slightly younger than that, because they tend to have more traditional values. So they might say, oh no, it's Latino or Latina. So yeah, it's usually most commonly used with younger population.
Cool. Well, we have 5 minutes left. Let me ask you one last question. If I could only do one thing to reach out to the Latino population, what would it be?
Understanding the culture more than anything.
Yes.
So that way you can understand, if you work at a financial institution and you have a Latino client or customer walking in with grandma, grandpa, nephew, niece, everybody, you know that you can't just tell them, well, you guys just wait outside. It's like, no, they are part of the group, and to them, to that customer, they are crucial. They are important to be part of the transaction, to learn about whatever they're doing there. So it's very important to include them if they are there too. So don't be so like surprised if you see a Latino customer walking in with the entire family. The same when they go shopping to the supermarket, you might see this group of this family going shopping is very common. So I will say understanding the culture. I'm trying to be short. I talk a lot, so.
You're doing fine. This has been great and very, very informational. So we have one last question here. We already answered it, but so I'll just go quickly through it. What is the best social media to target the Hispanic population? And you mentioned Facebook and WhatsApp. Facebook is uniformly the best one in all of Latin America, and WhatsApp is uniformly the best chat group app that everybody is, actually the whole world uses it except for the US. So if you want to communicate outside of the US, use WhatsApp. You'll find everybody there because it's a humongous app outside of the US.
Exactly, because with WhatsApp, you can send text messages, you can send pictures, you can send videos, you can send music. The same thing you can do with your regular texting inside the US, you can do with WhatsApp, and it's when you have Wi-Fi. So I use it a lot with
Wi-Fi or no Wi-Fi. You can use WhatsApp when you have a cell phone as well. And it's global, which is, I mean, I communicate with people in Europe, South America, US, the same. And that's the first choice for everybody out there. So
it's true.
Not to market, not to put an ad for them, but okay.
They should be sponsoring it.
Yeah, no kidding. You know, WhatsApp here. So mention a book. Tell me one book that I should read so I can understand culture and marketing.
I have several. So I mentioned The Whole Enchilada.
Oh yeah, there it is.
I love the book. I have several ones. This one is really good. Marketing to Hispanics by Terry Soto. Oops, I'm covering it. That one is really good. And then, hold on. Oh, I'm sorry. It went. I'm sorry, my keyboard. Dropped my books here. The other one that I really enjoyed is this Hispanic Marketing. It's a really good book. And the last name is Corseni. So really good. As far as websites, there are several good ones. The Pew Research is really good. And also the Latino Leadership Institute. They are in Denver. Really good. Really, really good information that they have there too. And I'm sure there are others too. Those are the two that I can remember right now. Latino Leadership Institute.
Okay, can you do me a favor and
Yeah,
stop sharing your screen? So
I can do
we
that.
can see you better since we are finishing up. It says at the top of your screen, it will say stop
Yeah,
sharing.
my mouse just needs to
Okay,
see.
there you are. Now they can see us. So the books
Okay,
were about this
hello.
big on the screen. Yeah.
Oh, darn it. Do we start over?
No, that's okay. We
Okay.
have to get going. Well, I want to thank everybody. We're done. We're
Yes.
out of time. I have one more question for you. It's a surprise question. But before, I want to thank everybody for being here, for listening
Yes.
to us. Thank you to our public and our sponsors. We are going to put this video on our YouTube channel, and we're going to share on our Facebook page as well. And all the information to contact you is going to be here in the description.
Right.
So you guys, anybody, you guys can contact Natalia with questions and any other questions you have for research, for culture, for marketing to the Hispanic.
And if I might interrupt, Ricardo, feedback. I would love to hear your feedback about the presentation. That's the only way that we can grow and improve. Thank you. Sorry, Ricardo.
No, that's okay. So Natalia, you're a member of the Latino Chamber. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Our public, if you want to become a member, go visit our website. You've been seeing my information here all throughout the presentation. Go like our Facebook page. Go like our YouTube channel. We have a lot of good stuff, and we do these webinars almost every Wednesday. And we have many other videos that are educational and informational that you guys can see. So with that, your surprise question.
Oh.
What's your favorite word?
What's my favorite word? In English or Spanish?
Yes.
Oh my goodness. Ice cream.
Oh yes. You're my favorite.
Well, it's summer. It's summer.
All right, everybody. With that, thank you and good night. And until next time.
Yes. Adios. Thank you for joining us today.